Jackson, Mississippi, a place where the sun scorches slow and the silence of secrets weighs heavier than the southern humidity. It's a town that never quite lets go of old values, especially when it comes to what a man should be and what a woman shouldn't. And for Tyrone Marshall, those lines were never meant to be crossed. Tyrone was 43, a sturdy African-American man with thick hands from years working as a mechanic at Weller's Auto. His daily uniform was grease-stained overalls, a bandana in his back pocket, and gospel music humming from his pickup truck. Folks around town respected Tyrone, quiet, God-fearing, and set in his ways. He wasn't flashy or dramatic. His first marriage had ended bitterly over differences, as he put it. Truth was, his ex-wife had ambitions that made her restless, and Tyrone, he just wanted peace, faith, and a woman who knew her role in a home. So when Selena came along, she seemed like everything he'd prayed for. He met her after Sunday service, sitting alone in the third pew. Selena was soft-spoken, graceful, and always dressed modestly. A beige blouse, long skirt, flats. Her voice carried the gentle hush of someone who'd learned how to disappear in a room. She didn't gossip like the other church women, didn't plaster herself on social media, and never questioned his authority. "I've been through some storms," she told him once, eyes cast downward. "But God's still working on me." To Tyrone, that wasn't a red flag. That was testimony. They started slow, coffee after Sunday worship, long walks in the park, quiet dinners where she'd listen more than she'd speak. Tyrone found comfort in her presence. She wasn't clingy, didn't pry, didn't push. She laughed at his corny jokes and never criticized his silence. And most importantly, she didn't ask for much, except space. She didn't like being photographed, rarely allowed herself to be tagged on Facebook, and avoided conversations about her past. Tyrone didn't mind. In fact, he saw it as refreshing. "She's not like these loud, messy women out here," he told his brother Marcus. "She's gentle, pure." Marcus wasn't so sure. "You don't know where she's from. You don't know what she's hiding. You ever met her family?" Tyrone shook his head. "She don't have much family left. And that don't bother you?" Tyrone shrugged. People lose people. But the whispers started soon after the engagement. Some folks said they'd seen Selena once in Baton Rouge, back when she went by a different name. A man's name. Others said she used to disappear for weeks at a time. One neighbor swore she overheard Selena talking to someone on the phone, speaking in a deeper voice than usual. Tyrone dismissed it all. Gossip. Jealousy. "They mad I finally found a good woman," he said. He proposed on Easter Sunday, right there on the church steps, with half the congregation watching. Selena's hands trembled as he slid the ring on her finger. "You sure about this?" she asked in a whisper only he could hear. "Yeah," Tyrone said, smiling. "Ain't nothing you done before that matters now." But what if it did? What if the one secret she held, the one secret she never intended to tell, wasn't just part of her past? It was her, and it was coming. The wedding was quiet, just a dozen chairs set up on the lawn behind Tyrone's mother's house, a makeshift arch wrapped in white tulle and plastic lilies. The air smelled like barbecue smoke and freshly cut grass. There was no band, no DJ, no expensive photographer, just Cousin Rhonda taking photos on her iPhone and Deacon Ellis reading from Corinthians. Tyrone had never been more certain about anything. When Selena walked toward him in that simple cream-colored dress, her eyes watery, her shoulders hunched like she was afraid someone might snatch her from the moment, he saw beauty. Not the kind plastered on magazine covers, but the kind a tired man dreams about when he's had enough of the world's noise. And when she whispered, "I do," in that breathy, trembling voice, he felt chosen. The first few weeks were blissful in that small, working-class way. Tyrone would come home from the garage, and Selena would be there, dinner hot on the table, gospel music humming low from the kitchen speaker. She never raised her voice, never questioned where he'd been, and always had a warm towel ready when he got out of the shower. Tyrone thought, finally, peace. They laughed about dumb things, bad TV shows, their neighbor's yappy dog, the way the cashier at Piggly Wiggly never looked them in the eye. They took walks at twilight, holding hands in silence like they didn't need words anymore. Selena kept her world small, never went out with friends, never took phone calls in front of him, never talked about life before Jackson. At first, Tyrone thought it was humility. Some people had passed too ugly to drag into new love. And she'd warned him once, told him she'd made mistakes. But so had he. Who hadn't? Still, there were moments. Like the first night, they tried to make love. Selena had turned away in the dark, tensing when he touched her waist. "I'm not ready," she said. "Can we wait just a little longer?" Tyrone didn't press. He was raised better than that. But weeks passed, then months, and each time he tried, she'd pull back. "I want to wait until it's special," she said. "We're married," he answered gently. "It don't get more special than this." She'd look away. Just a little longer. It got to him eventually. Not because of the sex, but because something fell off. He started waking up in the middle of the night to the sound of her crying in the bathroom. When he'd ask what was wrong, she'd smile and say she was fine. Always fine. But her eyes told a different story, like she was scared. Like she was hiding behind her own skin. Then came the baby talk. Tyrone had always wanted children. A little girl with Selena's soft smile. A boy to throw the football with. But when he brought it up, her whole body stiffened. "You ever want kids?" he asked over breakfast one morning. Her hands froze on the coffee mug. "I don't know." "You don't know." "I mean," she cleared her throat. "What if I couldn't?" "You sick?" he asked, leaning in. "No, not like that. I don't know if God gave me that blessing." Tyrone sat back, confused. She'd never talked about fertility issues. Never mentioned trying before. "We could get checked," he offered. "It might be something simple. Hormones, timing." Selena stood up quickly, her chair scraping the tile. "I said I don't want to talk about it." That was the first time she raised her voice. And Tyrone felt something crack. He tried to ignore it, told himself marriage had bumps. That maybe she had trauma she couldn't talk about. But his mind started to spin. Why wouldn't she take photos? Why no social media? Why did she flinch when he touched her too long? One night, he stared at her while she slept, the moonlight casting a faint glow on her cheekbones. There was nothing masculine about her, nothing hard or sharp. But the doubts wouldn't die. They whispered louder than reason, louder than love. Then, about 3 months into the marriage, Marcus visited. "Bro," Marcus said, his voice low. "You ever Google her name?" Tyrone rolled his eyes. "Don't start. I ain't judging. Just saying, I looked. Couldn't find a thing. No school records, no job history, no family ties. Just blanks. Like she ain't existed till 2 years ago." Tyrone shoved his brother out the door that night. But his words stuck like a splinter under skin. Still, Tyrone told himself to trust her. Trust love. But trust only holds so long when truth is bleeding at the seams. And fate was already building the moment that would rip it all wide open. A night, a crash, and an X-ray that would change everything. It was a Tuesday night in early March, when the winds in Jackson cut sharp through the trees and the clouds sat heavy over the rooftops. Tyrone and Selena had just left his cousin's birthday party. The music had been too loud, the barbecue too greasy, and Tyrone had won too many beers, just enough to blur his temper, but not his memory. The argument started in the truck. "You sat the whole night like a ghost," Tyrone snapped, gripping the wheel even though he wasn't driving. "People talk, you know. They wonder what's wrong with my wife." Selena stared straight ahead, her knuckles tight on the steering wheel. "Maybe I don't want to be around people who whisper behind my back." "I defend you every damn day," Tyrone hissed. "But I can't keep explaining why my wife never wants to be touched, never posts a photo, never had a childhood, apparently." "I told you. I've been through things," she said, her voice barely audible. "I've been through things too, but I don't hide behind him," he barked. She slowed at a red light, the silence between them thick and hot. "I can't give you a child, Tyrone," she said finally. "Not now. Not ever." Tyrone leaned forward, the truth settling in his gut like spoiled meat. "What do you mean you can't?" "I mean I wasn't made to carry a baby. You need to stop pushing for something that will never happen." And then the light turned green. Before he could respond, a beat-up Dodge Charger came flying through the intersection, ran the red, and smashed straight into the passenger side. Glass exploded. Metal screamed. The truck spun like a toy tossed by God himself. When Tyrone came to, Everything was sirens and flashing lights. Blood trickled from his forehead, and his leg was pinned beneath the crushed dashboard. But all he could hear was Selena gasping beside him. I can't breathe. Hold on, he croaked, trying to reach for her. You're going to be okay. Paramedics pried open the door, shouting commands. Selena was pulled out first, limp, barely conscious, her face pale and streaked with blood. Tyrone blacked out. He woke up hours later in a hospital bed with a cast on his leg and a nurse checking his vitals. Where's my wife? He asked, voice hoarse. She's in surgery, the nurse replied, avoiding his eyes. What kind of surgery? Internal bleeding. They're trying to stabilize her. He didn't like the pause before her answer. Didn't like the way she quickly scribbled on the chart and left without another word. Later, a middle-aged black doctor with tired eyes entered the room. He introduced himself as Dr. Nichols, then sat beside the bed like he had something heavy to put down. Mr. Marshall, he said slowly, we need your consent for a secondary procedure. There's damage to some internal structures. We'll need to operate again if her vitals hold. What kind of internal damage? Tyrone asked, confused. What's wrong with her? Dr. Nichols glanced at the closed door, then lowered his voice. I need you to understand. What I'm about to tell you is confidential under medical ethics. Your wife, biologically, she was born male. Tyrone's mouth fell open, but no sound came out. We didn't know until we reviewed the scans. She has remnants of internal testicular tissue. She's undergone partial gender reassignment, removal, reconstruction. Whoever did it, they did a decent job, but it wasn't complete. She may have been on hormone therapy for years. But medically speaking, she was not born female. The walls seemed to close in. Tyrone gripped the edge of the bed, his heart thundering in his chest. You must be mistaken. I'm afraid not, the doctor said quietly. I know this is a shock, but we need a decision. The longer we wait. She lied to me, Tyrone whispered. She probably feared you wouldn't understand. Tyrone stared at the floor, face blank. She was right. 10 minutes later, he demanded to see her. The nurses objected, said she wasn't stable, but Dr. Nichols, perhaps sensing something deeper, allowed him in for just a few minutes. The room was dim, machines blinking rhythmically, tubes crisscrossing her body like tangled string. Selena's eyes fluttered open when he walked in. Her lips parted, dry and cracked. Tyrone, she whispered, weak as paper. He stood at the foot of the bed, arms stiff, jaw clenched. You lied to me, he said. I was going to tell you. When? He snapped. After a year? After I went to my grave, thinking I married a woman. I was scared, she whispered. I didn't want to lose you. You already did, he growled. She reached out, a trembling hand. I loved you. Every day. Tyrone backed away. You don't do this to a man. You don't play with his name. His pride. You think love is enough to erase a lie like that. Her eyes brimmed with tears. Please. But Tyrone didn't see Selena anymore. He saw a betrayal so deep, it burned through every tender moment they'd ever shared. Every dinner. Every walk. Every whispered, I love you. You made me a joke, he muttered. She shook her head weakly, tears slipping down her temple. Tyrone looked around. No nurses. No cameras. Just the beeping machines and the woman who had undone his reality. Then, without a word, he stepped forward, gripped the pillow behind her head, and pressed it down. She struggled, kicked, gasped, but she was too weak, and his rage was too strong. The machines went wild. A flatline. By the time the nurses burst in, it was too late. But what Tyrone didn't see, what he couldn't have known, was that a young nurse named Naomi Ellis had walked past the doorway seconds before the flatline. She had paused just outside, holding a folder full of chart updates, her sneakers squeaking softly on the linoleum. The curtain hadn't been drawn fully, and through the narrow opening, she saw him. Not the act in full, not the violence, but the motion, the pressure, the stillness after. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she didn't move, didn't think, just stood there, mind racing, heart pounding so loud she couldn't hear the machines. It was seconds before chaos exploded behind her, before other nurses pushed past and the alarms began blaring. Naomi backed away, slipping her clipboard onto a nearby counter like she hadn't seen a thing. But she had, and it haunted her. For days, she didn't tell anyone. Not because she didn't care, but because she couldn't process what she had witnessed. Did she really see what she thought she saw? Had grief made her misinterpret it? What if she was wrong? But by the time the trial came, Naomi couldn't live with the silence. She reached out to the DA, sat on the witness stand, hands trembling, voice thin as thread. I saw him lean in. I saw the pillow in his hand. I didn't stop him. That single statement shook the courtroom like thunder, and it sealed the verdict. Tyrone stood there, chest heaving, eyes wide and distant. She lied, he whispered. She lied about everything. But the lie was dead now, and everything else, his freedom, his peace, his soul, was about to die with it. The moment the monitors went flat, chaos erupted. A nurse screamed for help, and another slammed her palm against the code blue button by the wall. Alarms shrieked down the sterile hallway. Within seconds, the crash team flooded in, pushing Tyrone out of the way as they launched into chest compressions and CPR. But it was already over. Her oxygen levels had bottomed out. Her heart had stopped. Her body, already fragile from surgery, simply gave up. Tyrone stood in the corner, frozen, watching the team work with mechanical desperation. Sweat dripped down his temple. His hands were shaking. "She's gone," someone whispered. The lead doctor, a stocky man with a short beard and gloves soaked in Selena's blood, turned toward Tyrone. "What the hell happened in here?" Tyrone didn't answer. He just stared at Selena's lifeless body. "She lied," he finally muttered. "That wasn't my wife." The room went silent. The team exchanged glances. Medical professionals, yes, but also humans who understood exactly what those words meant. They didn't even wait for a full investigation before security arrived. Tyrone was placed in handcuffs right there in the hospital hallway, still in a paper gown for still attached to his arm. The same people who had saved his life just hours earlier now avoided eye contact. "You have the right to remain silent," the officer began, but Tyrone wasn't listening. His ears buzzed with the rhythm of his own heartbeat. It sounded like war drums in the distance. In the back of the police cruiser, he finally felt the weight of it. Selena was dead. He had killed her. The news spread like fire. By morning, local Jackson stations were plastering the headline across the screen. "Man kills wife in hospital after learning she was transgender." It was the kind of story that sucked the breath out of a room. Taboo, violent, intimate, and public all at once. The comment sections exploded. People from both sides of the political and cultural spectrum tore into each other like wild dogs. This was deception, plain and simple. He was pushed to the edge. No, that was murder. She didn't deserve to die just for trying to be herself. Why didn't she tell him? That's a betrayal. He didn't lose his pride. He lost his soul. No man of God kills. Even the church Tyrone once faithfully attended issued a statement condemning the violence. Pastor Green, who had officiated the wedding just months earlier, gave a sermon that Sunday titled, "The Dangerous Cost of Pride." Detectives began digging. The investigation uncovered what Tyrone didn't know about Selena. Born Cecil Lamar Jackson in Baton Rouge, she had come out as transgender at age 19, estranged from her family shortly after. She'd moved around a lot: Texas, Alabama, Arkansas, living under the radar, working low-wage jobs, slowly saving up for her transition. By the time she arrived in Jackson at 34, she'd completed enough surgeries and hormonal therapy that most doctors wouldn't notice unless they looked. But she'd never changed her birth certificate. That was the thread that tied it all together. That, and the fatal mistake of falling in love with a man whose love came with conditions. In jail, Tyrone didn't speak to anyone for days. He didn't ask for a lawyer, didn't eat, didn't cry. The guards watched him like a ticking time bomb. Then, on the 7th day, during visitation hours, his brother Marcus showed up. They sat across from each other on opposite sides of the glass. Marcus picked up the phone first. "You really did it," he said, voice low. Tyrone just nodded, his eyes empty. "I told you something was off, man, but damn, Ty, you could have just walked away." "She tricked me," Tyrone growled, fingers tightening around the phone. "She was your wife. She wasn't a woman. Then why'd you fall in love with her?" Tyrone didn't answer. Marcus leaned forward. I ain't here to judge, but you better decide fast what you're going to be when you walk into that courtroom, angry or honest. The trial began 3 months later. It was the most crowded courthouse Jackson had seen in years. Local activists showed up with rainbow flags. Older churchgoers came holding Bibles. Protesters with signs reading "Justice for Selena" and "Stop Trans Panic Defense" lined the sidewalk. Inside, the courtroom was a minefield. The prosecution painted Tyrone as a man driven not by shock, but by shame. They played his 911 call. They showed texts between him and Marcus, where he admitted something feels off weeks before the murder. They brought in medical experts to testify that Selena posed no threat and that Tyrone made a conscious decision to kill her while she was helpless. Ladies and gentlemen, the prosecutor said in her closing statement, this was not a heat-of-the-moment act. This was a man who felt humiliated and took it out on a woman who had already spent her whole life fighting to be seen. Tyrone's defense team, on the other hand, leaned into what's known as the trans panic defense, a controversial legal tactic in which defendants claim they were provoked into violence by discovering someone's transgender identity. They argued that Tyrone suffered a psychological breakdown, triggered by years of cultural pressure and personal trauma. They even called a psychiatrist to testify that Tyrone experienced dissociative rage after the revelation. He believed his masculinity, his faith, and his reality were all under attack, the defense attorney told the jury. He didn't kill out of hate. He killed out of psychological collapse. But the jury didn't buy it. After 2 days of deliberation, the verdict came down. Guilty. Second-degree murder. 30 years to life. Tyrone showed no emotion as the sentence was read. He looked straight ahead, jaw clenched, eyes still, as if he had already accepted the outcome long before the courtroom did. Outside, reporters swarmed. The verdict trended nationally. For some, it was justice. For others, it was betrayal. Selena's funeral was small, but powerful. Her chosen family, friends from Baton Rouge and New Orleans, trans women she had met over the years, gathered to honor her memory. They placed a white rose on her casket, each whispering her name softly before walking away. A local LGBTQ+ center in Jackson launched a memorial fund in her honor. They named it Selena's Voice, a grant to support Black trans women pursuing safe housing and medical care. Her story became a symbol, not just of tragedy, but of visibility. Back in prison, Tyrone spent most days alone in his cell. He read the Bible. He refused interviews. He wrote in a journal, page after page, always starting with the same sentence. I thought I knew what a lie was until I became one. And once, on the anniversary of her death, he wrote something different. She didn't kill me, but she exposed me. And now I gotta live with the man I truly am, no matter what I thought I was. Far away from that prison cell, in a dusty apartment in Baton Rouge, an old shoebox sat on the top shelf of a forgotten closet. Inside were pieces of Selena's life, before the name, before the surgeries, before the silence. Back when she was still Cecil, there were Polaroids from a high school talent show. Cecil playing piano in an oversized suit, smiling with lips pressed tight, like he was afraid joy might escape too loudly. Notes from classmates, most unsigned, many cruel. Freak, pick a side. You don't belong here. At 19, Cecil packed a duffel bag and took a Greyhound bus to New Orleans, sleeping in shelters, working dishwashing jobs, saving every dollar in a coffee can tape beneath a bunk bed. She didn't know exactly who she'd become, only who she could no longer pretend to be. She chose the name Selena one night while watching a telenovela in Spanish with a woman at a halfway house. That's you, the woman said, pointing at the screen. Beautiful, strong, but quiet, like you're always trying to disappear. Selena smiled for the first time in weeks. But even as she transitioned, she never escaped the fear. Men followed her once, called her names. A roommate stole her ID and threatened to out her at work. Another time, someone tried to rip her wig off in a gas station parking lot. She learned to keep her world small, safe, silent. And then she met Tyrone, warm, God-fearing, simple. He didn't ask too many questions. He listened. He made her laugh. And for the first time, Selena thought, maybe this is it. Maybe I don't have to run anymore. Maybe I can just be. Because sometimes, truth doesn't just set you free. It burns everything down with it. Time didn't move in prison the way it did outside. It dragged its feet, scraping metal against the floor. Each hour stretched out like a road with no end. And for Tyrone Marshall, that was both a curse and a reckoning. He'd been at Parchman Penitentiary for 6 months when the first letter came. There was no return address, no stamp, just a single sheet of folded paper passed to him through the food slot one morning with his breakfast tray. On it, a line written in familiar handwriting. You loved me once. Or did you? Tyrone stared at the note for 10 minutes before tearing it into pieces. But the questions had already started clawing. He didn't sleep that night. The thing about prison is, it doesn't let you forget. It wraps your crimes around your throat like a scarf soaked in gasoline, just waiting for the heat of memory to light the match. Every clang of the bars, every shuffled footstep down the corridor, every distant shout in the yard reminded Tyrone that he wasn't just locked away. He had put himself there. He'd murdered the only person who'd ever looked at him like he wasn't broken. And she had done it with eyes wide open. At first, Tyrone tried to keep to himself. He took a job in the laundry room, folded inmate uniforms, and spent most of his time in the prison chapel, where the Bible still offered some kind of structure, if not comfort. But inside that book, between verses of fire and forgiveness, he started hearing her voice again. Not loud, not angry, just quiet. Why didn't you let me live? One afternoon, the prison's therapist, Dr. Lisa Harmon, requested a session. She was a 50-something African-American woman with salt and pepper curls and the kind of eyes that didn't blink when you got ugly with the truth. Tyrone sat across from her, arms folded, face hard. You want me to say I regret it? He asked. No, she said calmly. I want to know if you understand it. I understand what I did. I don't need to cry about it. Lisa leaned forward. But do you understand why? He stared at the wall behind her. Because I was lied to? That's not a reason. That's a symptom. Tyrone's eyes narrowed. You calling me sick? I'm saying your need to control the truth destroyed someone who never tried to harm you. You didn't just kill her, Tyrone. You erased her. He stood abruptly. You don't know me. I know you killed a woman because you couldn't handle your own shame. The silence was thunderous. He left without another word. That night, he dreamed of Selena for the first time. She was sitting at their old kitchen table, wearing her Sunday dress, her hair wrapped in a silk scarf. She looked up at him, smiling, but her eyes were hollow. I still remember the way you held my hand in church, she whispered. You told me I was enough. I didn't know, he said. You didn't ask. Word of his crime had followed him into the prison walls like a shadow stitched to his back. Some inmates avoided him, whispering the words "lady killer" under their breath. Others mocked him outright. One afternoon, during yard time, an inmate named Eugene sauntered over, tattooed neck, permanent smirk. So you the one killed a tranny, huh? Tyrone didn't answer. But she made you feel like a man till you found out you was the woman in bed. Before Tyrone could react, a younger inmate stepped between them. Short, lean, face half covered by a teardrop tattoo. Back off, the kid said coldly. He already dying every day. Later, Tyrone found a note in his cell. You ever think the lie wasn't hers, but yours? By the 1-year mark of his sentence, Tyrone started writing letters. To no one in particular. To Selena. To God. To himself. He never mailed them. He wrote about his mother, who stopped visiting after the trial. About Marcus, who called once and never again. About the way his cell grew colder every night, like the prison knew he didn't deserve warmth. But mostly, he wrote about Selena. I hated you for making me feel like a fool. But the truth is, I hated myself for needing you. You made me believe I could still be loved, and that scared me more than the lie. Sometimes he wrote until his fingers cramped, pressing the pen so hard it bled through the paper. One letter ended with a single line. I wish I could undo the moment I put my hands on you. But I can't, and neither can God. In his 3rd year behind bars, Tyrone was transferred to a medium security facility where he volunteered to work in the prison library. It was quiet, forgotten, and for the first time in his life, he started reading stories beyond scripture, stories of people whose identities were not lies, but journeys. He read memoirs from trans men and women, articles, essays, and slowly, painfully, the armor began to crack. He had never truly tried to understand her. He had loved the illusion of Selena, but never made room for the whole of who she was. One rainy afternoon, he returned to his bunk to find an envelope tucked under his pillow. No name, no return address. Inside, a photograph. It was Selena, years younger, before the surgeries, dressed in a button-down shirt and slacks, standing next to a hospital bed, holding the hand of an elderly woman. Her mother, maybe? On the back, scribbled in ink. I was always just trying to be seen. Tyrone stared at it for hours. He didn't cry, but his hands trembled for the first time in years. That night, he returned to the prison chapel. He sat in the back pew, alone, while the chaplain extinguished the candles and shut off the lights. And in the stillness, he whispered something he hadn't dared say aloud. "I'm sorry." No lightning struck. No voice answered back. But for the first time since the hospital, Tyrone let his head fall into his hands and wept. Not for what he'd lost, but for what he had never understood. By his 5th year in prison, Tyrone Marshall had stopped counting days. He no longer marked excess on the wall or checked the calendar in the mess hall like the others did. His body moved by routine, breakfast, work detail, chapel, cell, but his mind lived elsewhere, somewhere between regret and awakening. He didn't talk much anymore, not because he was angry, but because the fire had gone out. The man who once held pride like armor now carried silence like a scar. And within that silence, something strange began to grow. Not forgiveness, not redemption, but a sliver of understanding. One afternoon, during a literacy class for new inmates, Tyrone was assigned to help a young man named Deshaun learn to read. Deshaun had just turned 21, serving time for a robbery gone wrong. He was sharp but rough around the edges, a kid who wore defiance like cologne. They started with basic vocabulary, moving slowly through picture books and writing exercises. "You ever been in love?" Deshaun asked one day out of nowhere, eyes still on the page. Tyrone didn't answer right away. He thought about Selena, her laugh, the way she touched the edge of her coffee mug with her pinky when she was nervous, the soft way she said his name the first time he told her he loved her. "Yeah," Tyrone said finally. "I was. Once." "You mess it up?" Tyrone looked down. "Worse. I destroyed it." Deshaun didn't ask more after that, but the question stuck with Tyrone like a stone in his shoe. Back in his cell, Tyrone pulled out the photograph of Selena he'd been hiding beneath the mattress. The one of her standing beside the hospital bed, smiling, half boy, half girl, fully human. He turned it over again, rereading the words. "I was always just trying to be seen." For years, Tyrone had told himself she was the lie, that he was the victim. But every letter he wrote, every word he read, every conversation he had since that day in the hospital showed him something different. She had lived her life in fear, not because she wanted to deceive, but because the world was never built to accept her truth. And Tyrone, he had become the very reason she stayed afraid. News reached the prison that Selena's story was being turned into a documentary. A small production company out of New Orleans had contacted her friends and people from the LGBTQ+ Center in Jackson, piecing together her life, from Baton Rouge to her final moments. They titled it Selena, Seen. They didn't ask Tyrone for an interview, but they didn't have to. When it aired on a local station and was later uploaded online, Tyrone watched it from the prison library's computer. He sat between 2 other inmates who didn't say a word. For 38 minutes, he didn't blink. There she was, laughing with friends, telling old stories, talking about how hard it was to find love when your existence was considered a trap. And then came the line that broke him. "If he ever finds out," Selena said softly to the camera, "I hope he still remembers how he looked at me when he proposed. I hope that part stays real, even if everything else falls apart." Tyrone closed the browser, walked out, and vomited behind the library. That night, Tyrone wrote a new letter. Not to Selena, not to himself, but to her family, whomever was left. He didn't know if they would read it. He didn't care. He just needed to say it. "I took your daughter's life in the most cowardly way a man could. I didn't just kill her, I denied her right to exist. I know now that her truth wasn't a weapon. It was a prayer, and I crushed it. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not even sure I deserve to speak her name anymore. But I need you to know she was seen. Maybe too late, but seen. He sealed it, addressed it to the LGBTQ plus center that had handled her memorial fund, and mailed it. Months later, he received a response. A simple card with nothing but a handwritten sentence on the inside. Thank you for finally looking. Years passed. Tyrone's hair grayed. His hands stiffened, but his voice softened. He began speaking during chapel services, not about salvation, but about truth, about shame, about fear. I'm not a preacher, he'd say. I'm not even a good man. But I know what it means to hurt someone because you didn't understand them. And I know it never heals, not even with time. He never used Selena's name publicly. That was her story, not his. But he carried her memory with the tenderness of a man who once held a love too fragile for the world he came from. And every time he looked in the mirror, he no longer saw a husband betrayed. He saw a man who betrayed love and learned too late what it truly meant. There was a new inmate in the library one morning, a tall, soft-spoken woman named Jamie, with smooth skin, quiet eyes, and a scar that ran from her jaw to her neck like a thread left uncut. She wore the same brown uniform, but walked with a grace that set her apart. Tyrone noticed the stares when she entered, the whispers, the tension that followed her like smoke. He expected resentment, expected her to avoid him. Instead, she sat across from him at the reading table one afternoon and said nothing. Just opened a book, flipped a page, then another. Silence stretched between them like fog. Finally, she looked up, caught his eyes, and held the gaze for a second too long. Tyrone's breath hitched. She knew, and yet there was no judgment, no fear, just a quiet understanding. The look of someone who had spent a lifetime being seen through and now saw straight into him. He lowered his eyes. Jamie stood, closed the book, and said softly, "You can't rewrite the first chapter, but you're still the one holding the pen." Then she walked away. Tyrone didn't speak for the rest of the day. But that night, he picked up his journal again, for the first time in weeks, and wrote 3 words. She forgave me. It had been nearly 10 years since Tyrone Marshall killed Selena. 10 birthdays, 10 Christmases, 10 candlelit vigils held outside the Jackson LGBTQ plus center in her memory. Tyrone had lived through them all, but never once allowed himself to speak at any memorial, nor petition for parole. He didn't believe in shortcuts through pain. He believed in carrying it. And now, at 53, his back bent slightly, his voice more gravel than grit, Tyrone sat in the prison chapel on a stormy November morning, alone. The rain tapped on the stained glass windows like soft knocking from the past. The walls were silent, but his heart was louder than it had ever been. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a final letter. Not to Selena, not to her family, but to the man he used to be. To the version of me that thought pride was more important than love. You were wrong. You thought being a man meant control. That truth was only truth if it didn't make you uncomfortable. You killed the only person who ever truly accepted you. Not because of who she was, but because you couldn't accept who you were. You wore fear like it was armor, when all it ever did was make you bleed inward. But I see you now. I see the weakness in your anger. I see the coward in your silence. And still, I forgive you, because if I don't, no one ever will. He folded the letter, placed it inside the back of his Bible, and closed it softly. Outside, the storm began to slow. The clouds thinned. A thin strip of light sliced through the window and touched the pew beside him. Tyrone didn't move. He let the silence hold him, because that's what Selena had always done, held him, even when she had every reason to let go. Months later, when he was finally granted a parole hearing, the room was tense. Victim advocates sat in one row, a representative from Selena's community center in another, his counselor, his chaplain, no family. Tyrone stood in his plain brown jumpsuit, shoulders heavy, eyes hollow but clear. "I can't change what I did," he said, "and I don't expect anyone to feel sorry for me. But I've spent every day since that night asking myself who I was and why I didn't ask her who she was. I let fear decide for me. and I will carry that shame long after I walk out of these walls, if you ever let me walk out at all." The room was quiet. The board didn't vote that day, but it didn't matter. Tyrone hadn't spoken to be freed. He had spoken to be seen. And that, in the end, was what Selena had wanted all along. Not pity, not secrecy, not even safety, just to be seen, fully, without condition. Tyrone never got to give her that in life, but in death he finally did. And sometimes, the truth doesn't arrive in time to save a life, but it might still be on time to save a soul. That Sunday, the prison chapel was nearly empty. Tyrone sat alone in the back pew, wearing his worn brown uniform. The morning light filtered through the stained glass windows, hues of gold, blue, and blood red, casting shapes across his hands, which trembled slightly on his lap. Above the pulpit hung a faded panel of glass, depicting an angel with open arms, wings outstretched. But from where Tyrone sat, the light hit just right, and the angel's face looked like Selena's. Or maybe it was just the way memory plays tricks when guilt has nowhere left to go. Tyrone stood slowly, knees stiff, and walked to the front of the chapel. He didn't speak, didn't kneel. He simply reached out and placed his hand against the beam of light falling on the altar. His eyes welled, not from sadness, but from something quieter, quivering, real. In that stillness, with no choir, no chaplain, no audience, Tyrone whispered, not out loud, not to God, but to her, "I see you." And for the first time, the chapel didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a beginning,